I guess some more people joining in, but they can just catch up later. But yeah, thank you all for joining our webinar today. It's really great to see how much interest there is in EV charging, especially over this last year. It's been a dramatic rise in a lot of electric vehicle uptake and charging infrastructure and interest. So it's always great to see that, and we're looking to see that grow in the future. So today we're going to be walking through the EV charging projects, specifically how to effectively plan your EV charging infrastructure for your sites. My name's Austin Devaney. I'm the Business Development Manager for EVSE, and I've got here Edward Chun, who is the Head of Projects for EVSE Australia.
Hey everyone.
Ed's been with EVSE for the last 6 years, so he has a wealth of experience in performing and planning electric vehicle charging infrastructure and solutions for large commercial organisations, as well as statewide electric fleet rollouts for governments and their buildings and such. So yeah, I guess today we're just going to run through some key information for you guys to consider to ensure that you cover all your bases when planning your infrastructure.
Yeah, well, thanks Austin for the introduction. I guess behind the whole idea behind this webinar is just for us to share our experience throughout the projects that we've done, so we can help anyone who's looking to transition into electric fleets or electric cars and get a good understanding of what questions to ask.
Awesome. So a brief intro about EVSE. So we were founded in 2015 with the vision to enable the seamless or easy transition from petrol vehicles to electric emissions-free transport. So we believe we've been doing quite a great job at that over the last 8 years that we've been in business, from allowing our customers to have full turnkey solutions and providing that to a high quality and standard.
Yeah, and in the past few years especially, we've worked with a lot of government organisations as well as major fleet companies to help with their electrification journey. So yeah, today will be good to be able to share those experiences with you.
Great. So yep, this is the process to plan your electrification journey. So the first stage would be the discovery session. I'd say this is one of the most important stages for the whole project, as it initially allows you to understand exactly what you're looking for and what you'll need. So for your EV charging solutions provider, they'll sit down with you and they'll figure out exactly where you want the charging stations, what location you'd like them to be installed at. They'll also have to ask you what vehicles do you want to be charged. So do you have passenger vehicles for your fleets, or is it going to be public charging, or is it going to be electric trucks or buses? So all of these vehicles have different battery sizes and might have different operational needs. So depending on how long they're on the road for, how long is their dwell time or stopover time. So all of this really factors into determining the right EV charging hardware. Once we understand that, we're able to recommend the best EV charging hardware solution for you guys. So that can be everything from AC charging to DC charging. And it can be from 7 kilowatts or 22 kilowatts of AC all the way up to 150 kilowatts of DC charging. So it really does vary, and there are a lot of costs involved, especially as you go into the DC range, as well as the power consumption. So it is good to start off discovering and understanding exactly what you're looking for, as this will allow you to have a more seamless and future-proof expansion into the future for your project. So Ed, I think, has been going to explain an example that we've worked with a council.
Yeah, I think Austin is very right there. I believe stage one is probably the most important stage out of the entire project, because it does indeed allow us to be able to identify what your needs are, what your requirement, and therefore funnel down to a solution that will work best for your situation or your requirements. So I'll share with you just a quick example that we've recently done with Parramatta City Council, where we deployed electric vehicle charging station across 2 of their different sites. So one of their sites is a fleet depot, so where people tend to, it's more for employees' use, so people are staying there for a slightly longer period of time. And they've also got a public-facing car park where they want to be able to offer the public charging facilities to the people who are spending a bit of time around the shops and be able to charge their car while they're at it.
Yeah, it's important to understand the setting. I guess for the fleet, it's in a depot, it's above ground, and they're looking for a freestanding solution. Whereas other options might be it's underground and they're looking for a wall-mounted solution. So it's really good to start off with this in mind and figure out or have a slight idea of what you want.
Yeah, and then in terms of cars, both fleet and the public car park, they are going to be charging passenger vehicles. So we know for a fact that on the AC network, it's more than sufficient for that sort of application. But more importantly, understanding for the fleet use where people or the employees are going to be staying at the depot for a significant amount of dwell time, so about 6 to 8 hours. We know that a charging solution will be good for that. And then likewise with public charging station where people are doing their shopping around the council area, they're staying there for a slightly shorter period of time. So with that in mind, we've recommended the 7 kilowatt charging system for the fleet depot and then a 22 kilowatt system for the public car park. So the idea behind this is with the fleet depot, they've got a bit more dwell time, they can charge a little bit slower. And then the public car park being a 22 kilowatt will provide them with a bit of a faster charge within 2 to 3 hours. And taking into consideration the car park is also going to be a built car park. So people won't essentially be staying more than 3 hours because otherwise they'll have to start paying for this session.
Yeah, that's right. And this might be a good example for Parramatta City Council with a 7 kilowatt charger that does around 40 kilometres of range per hour. But if it's an electric truck fleet that needs charging, you'd be looking at a DC charger that can provide a rapid charge for their large battery. So it really depends on your application and how you use your vehicles.
Yeah, and around this one as well, we just need to be mindful that a lot of people aren't necessarily charging from 0 to 100%. So both fleet and public, the idea is people will be able to top up their car when they're at the destination. So having a 7 or 22 kilowatt, in reality, it would only take about 1 to 2 hours to top up their car again, and they'll be able to use their car with about 80%.
Yeah, and with a lot of organisations, once they've got the hardware, they also want to consider a smart software solution as well.
So I guess with Parramatta City Council in their fleet depot, they put priority on being able to monitor and track the electricity usage, but more importantly, they wanted to restrict access so people can't just use the charging stations without any authentication. So with the deployment of software with the fleet car park, we were able to set it up so then it requires authentication in order to use the charging station. Very similar with the public car park, they do want monitoring and tracking capabilities, but more importantly, they also want the flexibility to be able to bill the end user for the electricity usage. So with the flexible software, it allows us to be able to customize the back end and put in the parameters to suit their specific needs and requirements. But more importantly, with being able to track, it allows them to plan for the future. So understanding the usage throughout a specific period of time, they can see that if they get an increase in demand, they can start scaling out their solution and start putting more charges.
Yeah, it's really important for when you go to a electric vehicle charging solutions provider that you keep in mind that when you're planning, you want to plan for the future. So always keep the end in mind. Right now, for example, you might be installing 2 charging stations at your workplace, but having a backbone infrastructure for 10 chargers means that as the EV demand increases, you can add charging stations on as you go. And this can reduce a lot of the upfront costs. So for example, if you install it all at the start, it means that you don't have to ask an electrician to run cabling again all the way from the switchboard. It's already being performed. All you need to do is just fit off charges as you go.
Yeah, and I guess load management is also a very important piece. As your demand grows, you want to make sure load management is in place so you don't exceed the building's capacity as you put more and more charges in.
Yeah, and that load management, some traditional buildings might have hardly any power available, and that's where load management can come in to allow you to scale your charging stations whilst protecting the electrical infrastructure.
Oh my god.
Awesome. I might also just say that if you have any questions, please just input them into the chat box and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. But yes, the second stage is the site evaluation stage. And this is important as it allows us to understand exactly what we're dealing with. So it's all well and good in the initial discovery session to understand the perfect EV charging hardware for you and maybe the power requirements that you want, but it's ultimately limited to the power availability of your building. So if your building does not have enough power available, then you'll be limited to how many chargers or what type of charging station you can install.
Yeah, and I think that's especially important if you've got multiple sites and you're looking to deploy electric vehicle charging stations, say across multiple sites. You want to pick the location that has the most ample amount of power available, so we can put some chargers in and run some testings and see at least what the usage is. So so once you pick that site, then what we can do is we can organize an electrician to go on site and do a site inspection. So our electrician will be able to do a detailed walkthrough around the building and provide some suggestions. So for example, location of the charging station. Sometimes the desired location is not the most cost-effective and feasible location. So when the electrician is on site, they'll be able to provide some recommendation around what the best location is for the charging station, taking into consideration the cable run, the distance to the distribution board, and see if there's any civil work that is involved.
Yeah, I think another important aspect to keep in mind is internet connectivity and reception, especially if you want a software solution on your charging stations. A lot of the time, from our experience, a lot of people just don't really consider the internet side of things until later on, and that can lead to some ongoing issues.
Yeah, and that's very important if your charging system utilizes a software platform. If you want the system to work reliably, you want to ensure that internet reception is ample at the location of the charging station. But yeah, another consideration when the electrician is on site is to understand the power availability. So in a lot of the building, there's generally a schedule on the distribution board, and this will allow us to get a good understanding of what the existing appliance is on the distribution board, and from there potentially determine how many chargers you can install at that site. So in some of the sites where there are higher amperage drawing appliances, we could even get the electrician to hook up a data logging analysis. So what that means is they can hook up a machine to the distribution board for a set period of time, so generally 7 days, and they can understand the peaks and troughs of power usage and therefore determine what the available supply is and ensure we don't trip the main power.
Right. So once we've understood your EV charging requirements in the discovery session, and then we've gone out to site and we understand the electrical infrastructure requirements and what's necessary for the scope of works to install the chargers.
Yeah, I'll just go back to that slide. I think scope of work, very important.
Yep.
Once again, the location of the charging station, we need to take into consideration the civil works. So any trenching or excavation involved, because that will very quickly ramp up the cost of the installation. And if it's a high riser, whether there are any existing cable trays that we can use, any risers or slab penetration that we need to do, or whether we have to build new infrastructure such as an electric vehicle distribution board.
Great. So stage 3 would be the engineering and design stage. So this stage involves essentially our electrical engineering teams or your EV charging solution provider to create a proposal, as well as engineering designs and schematics to ensure that they cover the full scope of works and the costings involved in the project.
Yeah, so once we've got all those information back from the electrician, then we'll be able to bring it into our engineering team who will put together that proposal. Just a few examples on the right-hand side. At the first instance, we'll put together a wiring diagram just to ensure visibility and clarity between all stakeholders of what we're going to do in terms of the electrical infrastructure. And then for major projects, we'll even put together a 3D render. And this allows us to be able to visualize the final installation and see if there's any if there's any pieces of the puzzles that we're missing when we're doing a site walkthrough. So we understand that electric vehicle charging stations are a very expensive investment for a lot of businesses. So things like the mechanical protections like safety bollards and wheel stops we would generally see in the 3D renderer and see whether we'll be able to put those infrastructures in.
It's also a great way for the client and the EV charging provider to understand what's missing or to see if there are any concerns. So you have full visibility over the final product.
And this is also important for our electricians as well. So when they go and do the installation, there's a visual of what our expectation is or what the customer's expectation is. So we can ensure that everyone's on the same page and the delivery is up to standard and everyone will be happy with the final results. So, some of the businesses, they also like to be able to promote the brand. So we also offer custom branding for a lot of our electric vehicle chargers. But more importantly, if you wanted to be able to promote your green incentives, then we also offer signage as well as bay painting to be able to dress up that bay, raise awareness and make sure people don't park their internal combustion car in those EV parking bays.
Yeah, that's right. And again, with data as well, if you're there's a number of different ways to run data and internet to the charging stations. From experience, if you're running it to the internet of your building, so the comms cabinet of your building, you might run into data clearance issues. So what you should consider is to talk with your IT team before this to understand if there are issues or if they need to allow some ports to be accessible to the EV chargers, as this can reduce time and complexity.
Yeah, and I think this is more important for basement levels where sometimes reception could be quite limited.
Yep.
But in any other cases, building internet is great, but from experience, we tend to like to put in a separate 4G modem. So what that means is if the system was to ever go offline, we can detect the problem straight away without having to go through the building's IT department.
And that would be a separate 4G modem in an area where there's solid 4G coverage. So for electrical teams that go out to site, you need to make sure that they check for 4G coverage both at the charging location as well as where they would like to install an external 4G modem, because like I mentioned earlier, if you don't and it's sort of a last minute thing, there can be ongoing issues with data and that can drop out the software, so it can allow people to not be able to charge. I guess one other thing to consider for data is for the user side. It's all well and good if the charging station has data, but if it's in a low reception environment in the basement car park, a user needs to be able to scan on to a charging station using their phone, especially if it's public and you can't give them RFID cards. They'll need to scan on using their phone, and if they can't log in because there's no Wi-Fi, then they're going to have issues as well.
Yeah, and most of these charging stations, especially public, is using a software platform to build the end user. So like Austin said, the reception at the location of the charging station is equally as important.
Yeah, and as you can see on the right-hand side image, it went from the wiring diagram to the 3D render design and then to the final product, which looks very, very similar. So the customer is very happy. Awesome, and now stage 4 is the installation stage. So once the client has approved the proposal, we now move on to the final stage, which is looking to install the charging stations.
Yeah, that's right. So generally, once we've got the notice to proceed from the customer, we would have a pre-installation checklist, making sure that we can have everything ready prior to the commencement of the installation. So what that includes is understanding the completion time frame. So having a good understanding of when you want the projects to be completed allows us to be able to plan everything accordingly so we can meet that time frame accordingly. So any out of hours time that we need to be aware of, as you can appreciate with a lot of electrical work, there will be disruption to the distribution board. So understanding what your out of hours time are so the electrician can come in and perform those specific works is very important as well. But more importantly, which is a lesson that I've learned in many of my projects, is for some of the bigger sites, there are generally site inductions that are involved before the electrician can even start working on the site. So we've had experience in the past where electricians was made aware of the site induction, and when they go on site, they can't perform the job and had to be turned away. So any of the site instructions, we need to be made aware of so we can make sure the electrician does them all before he even goes on site and start the installation.
Awesome. And then whilst that's occurring, you also want to start to arrange or order all of the available materials necessary for the installation. So this can include both the electrical team's requirements for the infrastructure, so the cabling and the cable trays and the circuit breakers, but also for the EV charging hardware, make sure that's available and in stock, as well as things like data cable, 4G modems, SIM cards, and internet switches. So it's all those things that we'll need to provide in total to the electrical team, so they install everything at once when they're on site and there's no hitches.
Yeah, and we're mindful that some of the projects does take a little bit of time from the start to the finished process. So for some of the major projects where there's a few months in between the initial process to now installation, we would even get the electrician to go back on site, do a final walkthrough, making sure that everyone is happy with the existing electrical infrastructure as well as the location of the charger before they start the installation. Because the last thing you want is electrician starts a job and the charger is in the wrong place, or there are changes to the existing infrastructure and we can't finish the job. So that's very important as well.
Right, and then obviously the last piece is once you have all that and you've cleared everything and the customer has full visibility, the installation commences. And so after the installation is done and all of the hardware and software is installed and ready to run and charge vehicles, you're now onto the project completion stage. So this project completion stage involves project handover documents, which is essentially outline the installation information for the EV chargers, like what distribution board we ran off, as well as where the 4G modems are and the internet switches are, as well as all the account manager information, site information, etc.
Yeah, and this also includes passing the customer off to the support team, and they'll be able to run you through how to use the charging station. And if software is also part of the system, then they'll also be able to run you through the software and how you go about using the software.
That's right.
And in a lot of public charging stations, according to the Australian standards, electric vehicle charging stations are to be serviced once a year. And so EVSE, we do also provide a maintenance level agreement where we can send an electrician out on site annually to do a visual, mechanical, as well as electrical inspection to make sure that the charging stations are in the most optimal level possible.
Yeah, and with your EV charging project, you want to make sure that your electric vehicle chargers have ongoing support. So with EVSE, we don't just sell and forget. It's more about having a partnership and providing that ongoing support into the future. Because you might need a couple charging stations now, but eventually you will need more as the Australian market transitions faster and further to electric vehicles. So being able to have software, for example, provides that local on-time support. You see when your charging station has gone offline, or if there's a problem that can be fixed straight away.
Yeah, and if there's any problems, we're just one phone call away, and we've got offices based in Sydney, Victoria, as well as Queensland to be able to facilitate any emergencies as well.
Yeah, and with the charging stations, a key component is to have all the spare parts available. So ensuring that your hardware provider has spare parts just in case something faults inside the units is really important, as it allows them to go out and quickly service the charger so it's back up running and charging your public vehicles or your fleet vehicles or your workplace vehicles.
It's like, because my cousin, he does consulting at ACOR. He told me that there's a regulation.
Awesome. So this that's essentially the 5 stages that you need to run through and make sure you're across to effectively plan for your EV charging infrastructure. That goes from discovery to what we like to do is a site assessment, and then after the site assessment, you go through the engineering and design, and then the installation, and then the handover. So having a good grasp of that and knowing the questions that you want answered, as well as to keep in mind all the things about data and power, will allow you to have a seamless transition with no hitches and a more enjoyable experience both for you, the electrical team, your EV charging provider, and your customers.
Yeah, and we always encourage any projects to get your EV suppliers or project managers involved as early as possible, as this allows us to be able to go through that questions and plan with the end in mind. So instead of having it all planned only to find out it's not the right solution, having your EV supplier involved as soon as possible will just ensure that you've got guidance as well as expert experience to guide you through that process throughout the journey.
Yeah, that's right. So as you can see here, this is a couple of our EV charging projects. So the EVSE Australia have been involved in a lot of public charging as well as fleet charging. Fleet vehicles, for example, take up 50% of the electric vehicle uptake in Australia. So that's a massive segment that we need to consider and make sure we have the right solutions for. But also public, we've recently worked with Harvey Norman to install EV charging stations at one of their sites. As you can see on the left-hand side, that whole experience is what they wanted. They wanted the charging stations branded. They want the car bays painted with stencils to allow the EV customer to know this is where EV charging stations are, to park in, plug in, and fully have that experience.
And allows them to promote their green incentives as well. They want people to know that Harvey Norman is obviously driving towards the green.
That's right. Yeah, and then we also do DC charging. So we've enabled a 40 kilowatt DC charger to charge the Linfox's BEV chain, so they're Green Fox electric trucks, as well as we've done work for Bunnings' electric trucks as well. So a lot of companies and organisations are starting to transition to electric, especially for councils as well. And for councils, they have both depot charging as well as home charging solutions that they need to be able to provide to their customers. So we also provide smart home chargers that allow you to track and monitor all of the electricity at home, so you can keep track of that and be reimbursed accordingly. Awesome. So that is essentially the webinar for today. Are there any questions from the audience? Let me have a look.
It's actually not a bad time to do like a session.
Awesome. Okay, I'll just have a look at the chat box.
It's actually not a bad time.
Okay. Yes, so we'll share a recording of the webinar. So what we'll do is we'll download that and send it to you all tomorrow morning.
Yeah, so with a lot of the charging stations, with the implementation of the software, you can do a lot of the parameters such as your billing tariffs. If it's a penalty time, so people can't stay there for 24 hours and they can't just leave their car plugged in. So with the deployment of the software, it's quite flexible, and you can put together different things to obviously suit your business model or suit your fleet's needs in order to make sure the most seamless usage throughout the electric vehicle charging station.
Yeah, so there's a couple of software platforms on the market at the moment. What you want to make sure is that you select a software that's OCPP compatible, as well as the charging hardware that's OCPP. That essentially just means that they're not agnostic and they work with a multiple of brands. They are some of the major brands on the market, but with those OCPP softwares, you are able to set different billing rates for different times. They're quite flexible to your needs. So if you want to have a certain, like for public charging, certain people plugged in and charging for only 3 hours, you can incentivize them to move by setting higher billing rates after that 3-hour period.
Are there any considerations for putting an installation in the
petrochemical plant or mine sites?
We have worked with a few energy companies. There are no major considerations that we need to be mindful of. I think it's very similar to any commercial sites, just having those EV charging stations there. So no major consideration that I'm mindful of.
Yeah, like if it's in the workplace car park at the front, that should be generally pretty standard. If you're installing the chargers in a workshop or some other environment, that may be a more specific example. We may just have to work with you and see what the setting is and what to look out for. But generally, it's generally pretty fine. We just run power off the switchboard, cabling to an isolator switch, which is Australian standard. You have to have a safety switch next to every charger, and then from there to the charging station.
Can you please provide some rough rule of thumb guidance in terms of power and site requirement for various capacity of DC chargers, so 75, 150 and 350 kilowatts?
Yeah. So DC charging, it obviously takes up a lot of power. So you look at a lot of the DC charging is located for public charging areas where they have one or two, or you see them in large commercial applications such as for electric buses that have large batteries or electric trucks. DC charging ranges all the way from 25 kilowatts up to 350 kilowatts right now in Australia. There's 75 kilowatts that takes around, I'd say 100, 120 amps of power. So when we go on site and when we have a look at your switchboards, that's what we want to have a look at. We want to see how full it is, and that way we can gauge how much electricity or amperage you have available.
The 5G is pretty good.
For DC charging, anything above 75 kilowatt, we would recommend a load analysis study on the site to see how much power we're working with, because that will give us a good idea of if it's even feasible to implement that DC charging station.
Yeah, I'd say most of the site, especially being commercial, anywhere from a 20 kilowatt DC charger to a 75 kilowatt DC charger, you might be able to power off with your existing building infrastructure. But anything above that 150 to up to 350 kilowatt, you might be considering putting in a substation in order to put in those bigger DC chargers.
Yeah, so like DC chargers, 75 kilowatts, you're looking at around $50,000 for the hardware. An installation can be in a $20,000 to $30,000 range. As soon as you need a substation, it does increase to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it really depends on your application, and do you need a 350 kilowatt, or can you have multiple 50 kilowatt chargers?
Yeah. Apartment individual car park spaces. Apartment individual car park space charger. What cost and billing services software on the annual basis?
Yep. So generally, software platforms, they charge a subscription fee. It's generally per charging port. I do know that the Explore and software for apartments, it charges $150 per port per year, and that's to allow billing, monitoring, and tracking. So that apartment body corporate is reimbursed for the electricity that the EV drivers are using from the common power of that grid.
Yeah, and the great thing about that software is it's able to track the electricity usage, so no one will have to do that manually to go to the meter and see what everyone's usage is. So you are only paying for your usage and not someone else's. But more importantly, it also takes the burden away from the body corporate, so they don't have to go and invoice everyone directly. Everything is done through the software and reimbursed back to the body.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. So do you have any recommendations that address fire safety, particularly in basement car parks? I do know that fire safety is becoming a concern. I think some legislation or something was passed in Victoria. To be honest, the EV charging stations, they're just made up of, especially the AC, they're just made up of like microboards or PLC boards. So there's no lithium batteries inside them. It's really the electric vehicle that has the battery. What we can do is we can supply like lithium-ion battery extinguishers next to the charging stations. All the chargers have inbuilt heat detector sensors, so if it reaches a certain temperature, it will just shut off. But to be honest, it's not really that different to a petrol vehicle, or a petrol vehicle is probably more likely to catch fire. So I do know that there's a bit of confusion, or people aren't too sure of what's going to happen with electric vehicles. But yeah, I would ask a fire safety engineer and see what they say.
Do you have any recommendations on an EV charging hub would be placed within a property? Obviously, shortest cable run is a consideration, but thinking about the best access, ease of identity within a car park space, etc. Yeah, so I think, like you said, electricians generally like to charge by the meter, so the closer it is to the distribution board, the more cost effective the install is going to be. And with our electrician walk around, the idea behind that is also to give you a bit of recommendation of what the best location of the charger will be. Sometimes the desired location is not necessarily the most feasible and cost effective. So having that walk around with the electrician allows us to be able to provide you with some recommendations. And
as well as checking for 4G coverage if you're using software. You can tell that I like to ensure that the internet connectivity is going to be stable, because we've in the past had customers that had issues with the internet connectivity, and so it can be an ongoing process to fix that. So starting off right at the start, you check for the 4G, make sure it's a strong signal, and then you should be good to go. Ken, is there a remote diagnostic facility via the software for off-site assessment of issues and monitoring of usage? Yes. So the software platform can be logged into via a dashboard on your browser, and with that, it will come up with a full dashboard that allows you to see all the status of your charging station. So the chargers that are faulted, the chargers that are active, a large amount of statistics. but it gives you full visibility over the monitoring and tracking of every charging session, as well as has features such as setting billing tariffs. You can also have static load management set on site on that charging station, and you can allocate RFID cards, generate reports. So it's quite a powerful platform that these OCPP software platforms provide, and I would be happy to do a run through with you after if that suits.
But it's very important, as Austin said, you do require a very stable 4G signal in order for that to work reliably. Obviously, yeah, without the internet connectivity, then we won't be able to communicate with the charging station. So, yes, the software gives you a lot of flexibility and powerful tools to be able to manage the charging system. But having that reliable connectivity is just as important.
Especially in terms of support. So the Ocular charging stations, they have inbuilt LCD screens, and the benefit with that is that it shows the faults pop up on the screen. So it's not just a blinking LED light. It will let the customer or the user know what the fault is. So they might just not have plugged their cable all the way in, or there might be an internal fault that needs further assessment. So it gives them straight away information on what's wrong. So they can call the sticker on the side of the charging station, which goes straight to our local Sydney engineering team, and they'll answer and pick up and identify the problem quickly. The software also gives that live update for support and updating status of the charging sessions.
I think that's all the questions in the comment section. We've got one more.
Chris?
Apartment car park private chargers. What happens if individual owner decides on a different supplier, and is the load distribution sharing software platform compatible?
Yeah, so for example, if they have different hardware options, so there's a couple popular brands out there like Ocular, like Schneider, ABB. You just need to make sure that if that owner buys an OCPP charging station, so what that means is that's a smart charger, and that will work with smart software.
Yeah, most of the software platform are brand agnostic, meaning it's able to work with multiple different brands.
Yeah.
So as long as the owner gets an OCPP 1.6 charger, which is the communication protocol between the software and the hardware, it should work with your software as well as hardware.
Yeah, but if they get like a basic charger that has no smart functionality, you won't be able to have software on top of that charger to track all the information and build them. So if you are going to have a list, you might want to generate a list of OCPP chargers and recommend that to your tenants to choose from.
Okay, yeah, so I hope you guys have found this webinar helpful. The idea behind it, like I said in the beginning, is just to give you guys a bit more guidance as to deploying new electrical infrastructure. As you can appreciate, with the increasing demand of electric cars, these are the things that we need to consider moving towards putting in the new infrastructures. So,
thank you all for joining. I think Christina has one last question, that can the chargers receive a fire trip signal in case of a fire in another location? I think that's a more specific question. If you want to, I can give you all my email address, which is austin.gurney@evse.com.au. Feel free to send me an email about this, and I can ask my electrical engineering team. I'll have to see, but I do understand that the electric vehicle is essentially the smart system, and it treats the charging station like a slave. So it might be more to do with the electric vehicle. If the battery on inside it monitors something or sees that something's wrong, it will shut off power. So I'll have to just check with you, but yeah, I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, obviously the charging station's also got inbuilt safety features such as temperature sensors. So if, say, there is indeed a fire, the temperature sensor will be able to detect that and stop delivering a charge. But yeah, like Austin said, a lot of these components are also communicating via the car. So the charging station is effectively there to service the car, so it does what the car is asking the charger to do.
But yeah, I hope you guys all learned something today. We will send this recording, including the questionnaire at the end, to you all tomorrow morning. So if you just want to get back to me with any questions, feel free to send me an email or contact our company on sales@evse.com.au or via our website.
process.
We're always happy to help and happy to start the EV charging journey with you guys. All right.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for everyone
Thanks for
joining.
joining. Cheers. See ya.
Let's go give him a round of applause. After I stop recording this session.